If you are interested in a commander deck that is both fun and enjoyable, then you would be better off on a different YouTube channel. This commander deck not only is devoid of both fun and enjoyment, but it is highly likely to have you angrily ousted from whatever playgroups you are a part of and cost you whatever friendships you may have. My name is the Professor, and it is my solemn duty to provide a deck tech on Leovold, Emissary of Trest. But you in the audience have no obligation to build it, and I would advise all my viewers to turn this video off immediately and go play a more pleasant deck instead. This deck will be Grief, Misery, and the Fun Police, a term which here means grief and misery. In the unlikely event that an opponent is able to win against it, they will take no joy. Everyone will hate playing against it and you, and it will ruin the game of Commander, not only for yourself, but for everyone you play it against. The dreadful displeasure of this vile commander has haunted me since the card was first spoiled, and every night when I continue my work on the Leovold deck tech, I find myself weeping thinking of its utter oppressiveness and severe lack of political talent. And thus, I regret to inform you that Leovold, Emissary of Trest, makes it so that each opponent can't draw more than one card each turn. As if this were not enough, whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. By itself, this is already an unpleasant commander for your opponents to deal with. When combined with cards such as Teferi's Puzzle Box or Anvil of Bogarden, as well as many other sadistic synergies, it becomes misery incarnate. In fact, with Teferi's Puzzle Box, we are able to lock our opponents out of ever having cards again. As the Puzzle Box reads, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player puts the cards in his or her hand on the bottom of his or her library in any order, then draws that many cards. Do not be confused by the wording beginning of the draw step, as the Puzzle Box and related cards' abilities trigger after the turn-based action of drawing a card for the turn. Thus, your opponent draws their cards for the turn, but then, thanks to the Puzzle Box, places their entire hand on the bottom of their library, and then, thanks to Leovold, they cannot draw their replacement cards. Thus, they end up with 0 cards in hand, and you have successfully locked them as well as other players from having any cards. When this does occur, no matter the size of the smile on your face, the shame that you will feel deep within your heart will be immense. Know that it is justified. Your opponent's only hope is that there is an instant, pun intended, between drawing their card and then placing it in their library, and in that instant they can cast an instant speed spell, hopefully killing Leovold or the Puzzle Box. Leovold players call this fair. All other players call it anything but. Anvil of Bogarden reads, players have no maximum hand size, an advantage for ourselves given the card draw, and that, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, then discards a card. As with Puzzle Box, your opponents draw their card for turn first, and then Anvil causes them to draw an additional card. However, just as before with Leovold, that second card draw cannot occur. They then move to discard a card. An opponent with no cards in hand will forever draw one card, then immediately discard that card. It is with the deepest regret that I must inform you how truly easy it is to cause all opponents to discard their entire hands with this deck. How is that possible, you might ask? To wheel in Magic the Gathering is a term that means to discard your hand and draw 7 cards. This originates from the card Wheel of Fortune. To draw any card in this game can indeed be seen as fortunate. To draw 7, extremely so. However, with Leovold in play, Wheel of Fortune would more accurately be named Wheel of Misfortune. Misfortune being what your opponents will experience whenever a wheel effect takes place, something that, it gives me great sorrow to confirm, this deck has many of. Day's Undoing, Jace's Archivist, Wheel and Deal, Dark Deal, and Whispering Madness will all be the end of our opponent's hands with Leovold in play. We discard our hand, then draw cards to replace it. But all our opponents can do is discard and then nothing else thanks to Leovold's ability, as they are unable to draw any replacement cards if they have already drawn one for the turn. This deck also has the very bad notion to run Notion Thief. Notion Thief acts as a kind of Leovold Light. It has flash and reads. If an opponent would draw a card except the first card he or she draws in each of his or her draw steps, instead that player skips that draw and you draw a card. This not only shuts down your opponent's draw in the same manner as Leovold, providing the same interactions, but on top of it provides card advantage for yourself. All other draw spells now work in your own favor. Plagiarize works in the same manner, and in addition to the disastrous outcome for our opponents with wheel effects, all of these cards also contain strong synergy with cards such as Consecrated Sphinx, Cephalid Colosseum, and Gyre Reach Sanitarium. The Sanitarium being particularly apt, as our opponents will quickly lose their minds as well as their patience when playing against you. Next, just to be as miserable as possible, the deck also runs both Helm of Obedience and Leyline of the Void to destroy what little love and respect our friends may have still had for us. Leyline will exile our cards without them actually hitting the graveyard, and Helm mills our opponent until X cards have actually hit the graveyard, and thus we can mill our opponents to death in one hit with these two pieces in play. This is not to say the deck relies on combo only. In fact, being in the treacherous treasure colors of Sultai allows it access to some very powerful inclusions. Tassiger the Golden Fang is another Sultai commander of great power and stature, brought shamefully low here in service to Leovold, and bringing you, the player, extra cards from your graveyard or just beating face. Deathrite Shaman is one of the more powerful planeswalkers in the game, and in Leovold it offers us ramp, life gain and life loss in a pinch, but also the effect of shutting down our opponent's graveyards if they are up to any tricks. Teferi allows us to flash in creatures, but also prevents our opponents from casting any spells at any time that they could not otherwise cast a sorcery. Excellent for surprise and protection. Expropriate is here for flavor and greed, which is in part why we also run Villainous Wealth. The latter, however, serving as a way to help ourselves to some of our opponent's powerful spells. Jace, Vryn's Prodigy, is our other planeswalker. Easy to flip and then flashback spells from our graveyard. Chasm Skulker is diabolical with Leovold. It gains a +1/+1 counter for each time you draw a card, which in this deck is incredibly often. And when it dies, it puts X +1/+1 squiddies into play, where X is equal to the number of counters on it. In fact, after the lock, this is often a win condition unto itself. I'll talk about our other win conditions in a moment, although the most common win condition in this deck is our opponent uttering curse words in our direction and then scooping their cards off the table. Scavenging Ooze does what Scooze does. Gobble up graveyard to grow bigger, gaining us life and getting rid of buried threats that our opponents planned to bring back. Finally, Laboratory Maniac serves as an alternate win condition. We can draw and mill ourselves into oblivion with this deck, or as is often the case, one of our opponents may attempt to mill us out as a way of putting an end to the misery we are causing. But Laboratory Maniac turns that into our alternate win. It's a great way to go, right to the winner's circle, that is. The deck runs the typical tutors of Mystical and Vampiric, as well as Fabricate for grabbing either the Helm, Anvil, or Puzzle Box. Insidious Dreams is an insidious inclusion for a deck such as this. If you don't have exactly what you need in your hand, well, discard the duds and tutor for the spells you desire. Yes, they go on top of your library in any order, but with cards such as Dig Through Time and Impulse, we can draw right into them, to say nothing of the arrangements Leovold can make for us. This build does not run Doomsday, as it affects a lot of the rest of the structure of the deck, but if you are interested in the multiple varieties of misery that Leovold can cause, please feel free to look into a Doomsday variant. Our counter magic is a big package. It can be adjusted to your needs and tastes, but will likely include the following: Counter Spell, Disallow, which hits spells and abilities, Misdirection, Dream Fracture, Negate, and Counter Squall. You're going to have a lot of hate thrown your way, and rightfully so, and thus Desertion gives us the big bad finisher our opponent may have tried to bring out against us. Finally, when all else fails, Cyclonic Rift. The deck needs a way to bring things back from the grave graveyard, be they protective counter magic or key pieces of our puzzle. In this regard, Seasons Past, Snapcaster Mage, and Torrential Gearhulk are all included. Let's talk a bit about those iterations. Depending upon your playgroup's meta, you will need to fiddle with the various knobs and dials of your Torture instrument, Commander deck, to fully create the perfect Leovold lockdown. The following are some features of the deck you can dial up or dial down as you see fit. Pillow Fort. It's a good idea to discourage and deflect attacks, so the Pillow Fort standard of Propaganda is included, as is Arachnogenesis for Spider Fog. Illusionist's Gambit to not only fog, but send the attackers at another opponent, a kind of fog you to our enemies, and I'm always a fan of the protection of Kira the Great Glass Spinner combined with Spellskite. Removal. Just like with Counter Magic, our removal package is highly flexible, but I recommend and run the following: Killing Wave, Toxic Deluge, Pernicious Deed, and the classic Larry Niven's Disc for board wipe, Hero's Downfall and Terror for targeted removal, and Krosan Grit for artifact and enchantment destruction. Any additional finishers that you might want to run will be unique to you. You are putting all of your opponents into a hardcore lockdown here, and if need be, you can just try for commander damage with Leovold, some players including a sword or two or other fatties, such as Inkwell Leviathan, but my finisher of choice is Guile. Guile goes with everything, and it is never going to be removed entirely from your reach, so there's no chance of losing this big fat smack attack. We are in green, so we want to take advantage of typical ramp spells, such as Birds of Paradise, Cultivate, Kodoma's Reach, Explosive Vegetation, and I like to run Elves of the Deep Shadow. What about our mana base? The rest of the mana base and artifact accelerants will follow the guidelines outlined in my 3-color mana base video. But with an addition to the already mentioned cards of Sanitarium and Colosseum, we want to be sure to run Academy Ruins and Stronghold for Graveyard Recursion, and Tolaria West for its Transmute Tutor effect. Although this dastardly deck is potently powerful and likely to win, it brings with it melancholy and woe to the pilot. So please, do not make the same mistake many before you have made, and look away from the deck list in this video's description. Offer no suggestions in the comments section to improve upon said list, and whatever you do, take no part in the cruel designs and designed cruelty of Leovold, Emissary of Trest. You might think that Leovold ought to be banned and played only in Legacy. Teferi's puzzle box sleeved and rotting in a binder, the Anvil of Bogarden nowhere to see. But there's no just for fun format, not here and not there. Commander is all discard and woes. You dream your opponents won't build decks like this, but that's not how Commander goes. No, that's not how Commander goes.